Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy, where today we continue our journey through the American Revolutionary War with a look at Valley Forge, the Homefront, finance, the role of Native Americans, the war at sea, and the British arrival in the southern states, which would lead to the beginning of the end of this long struggle. So in our last couple of videos, we looked at how the Americans faced the most powerful navy and one of the strongest armies in the world. To face this menacing force, the Americans had the Continental Army, joined by militias or citizen soldiers from all over the country, which, as it turned out, was a pretty weak and inexperienced army. We looked at how the country was divided between patriots who favored the war for independence and the loyalists who wished to remain part of Great Britain. We also looked at the role of African Americans, making this one of the only integrated wars in early U.S. history. We discussed the demoralizing capture of New York and Philadelphia by the British, and the much-needed victory of Washington's crossing of the Delaware in a sneak attack. Finally, we looked at the Patriot victory at Saratoga that would change the course of the war for good. So today we are closing in on the end of this long and monumental war, with both its struggles and its victories. And as we've stated in other lessons, we will walk you through the events and course of the war that you need to know for your class and guide you to how this improbable victory was achieved. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a variety of resources are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just click the link in the notes below this video or search for Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy. So we ended our last video by stating that the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga would change the course of the war. But how? The Americans pleaded to Britain's enemies, France and Spain, for help. In fact, since 1776, founding father Benjamin Franklin had been in France trying to gain support for the Americans, both monetarily and militarily. The popular Franklin charmed the French into secretly supplying the Americans with money. The French, however, did not want to provide military aid because they didn't think the colonists could defeat the mighty British at this point. However, the victory at the Battle of Saratoga convinced the French and other nations that the Americans might actually be able to win this war. In February 1778, France declared war on Great Britain and slowly began sending additional money, supplies, and soldiers now to assist the Patriots. Their help would be crucial in winning the war eventually. Spain, while not providing direct aid to the Patriots, declared war on the British as well. They occupied British troops fighting battles in Florida and parts of the American South, redirecting soldiers that could have been used against the Americans. While things looked good on the international front, they did not look good at home. As British General Howe settled into Philadelphia for a long, cold winter in 1777, General Washington set up camp 20 miles away at a place called Valley Forge. Lacking the power to tax, the Continental Congress were unable to provide Washington and his troops with enough supplies. They lacked food, clothing, and adequate shelter. As one of Washington's officers put it, quote, "It is very certain that half the army is almost naked and a great measure are barefooted." Washington repeatedly begged the Continental Congress for more supplies. But again, Congress had one major weakness. They didn't have the power to tax. Now, it's understandable that the states didn't want to give a national government this power. After all, taxes are what started this whole dispute. But wars are expensive. The Continental Congress had to ask the states and other countries for money and started printing their own money, which the states did as well. Without the gold or silver to back up its value, this paper money was almost worthless. This led to inflation, which is when money loses its value. None of this mattered to Washington and his troops. Many of his men died from disease as smallpox ravaged the colonies. Others, both starving and facing hypothermia, decided to desert and fled home. Washington was in danger of losing his whole army. However, in the spring, Washington informed his men that France had entered the war and new soldiers poured into the camp at Valley Forge. Many Europeans came to America to help with the war effort, and one of those leaders at Valley Forge was the Marquis de Lafayette from France. He would become one of Washington's most trusted leaders and a hero to American independence ever since. Another European to help the Patriot cause was Prussian, aka German, Baron von Steuben, a veteran of the 7 Years' War, who trained Washington's inexperienced troops at Valley Forge in the art of military drills, tactics, and discipline. Meanwhile, the war wasn't only tough on those freezing it out at Valley Forge. With so many young men off fighting this war that stretched out over 8 years, the war was difficult on the wives and children at home, many of whom relied on labor-intensive farm work to make ends meet. There was a void that was difficult to fill without the head of the household. The war also made life more difficult for those living on the western frontier. The British provided weapons and encouragement to native tribes to attack American settlers. While Native Americans did fight on both sides, they mostly sided with the British, who at this point were less of a threat to their lands than the Americans. Of course, the area where the Patriots were at greatest risk was on the sea. As we have stated, Great Britain possessed the strongest navy in the world, and they blockaded most American ports and harbors, making obtaining war supplies extremely difficult and limiting the Continental Army's ability to transport troops by sea. The weak American Navy sanctioned privateers, a fancy word for pirates, who, using privately owned merchant ships, captured British vessels and badly needed cargo. The American Navy did have one hero, though, in the form of John Paul Jones. In 1779, the brave American naval officer decided to take the fight to Britain. He attacked several British ports and won several battles. After a particularly fierce battle off the coast of England, a British admiral asked Jones if he would like to surrender, to which Jones replied, quote, "I have not yet begun to fight, sir." With this and subsequent victories terrorizing British ports, Jones became an instant hero of the Patriots. Back in America, the British then set their sights on the South, an area where they thought strong loyalist tendencies might invoke some help from the Americans. In late 1778, British General Henry Clinton sent 3,500 troops from New York and captured Savanah, Georgia. In 1780, General Clinton led an attack himself on Charlestown, today Charleston, South Carolina. The strong defense of Charlestown demonstrated to the British that the South was not as big a loyalist stronghold as they had thought. The British took thousands of prisoners, providing the Patriots with one of their most stunning defeats. Clinton returned to New York, leaving General Charles Cornwallis in command of the South, a man who would eventually play a big role in the British defeat. Under Cornwallis, the British won their first major battle of the Southern Campaign at Camden, South Carolina, but holding on to the South would prove increasingly difficult and eventually lead to their downfall. And that's where we will pick up next time on the road to Yorktown and British surrender. But before we do, let's review. This founding father spent years in Europe trying to get support for the colonies. Now, he wasn't the only, but he's the one we mentioned, and he's pretty famous, Benjamin Franklin. These two European powers declared war on the British. France and Spain. What was the name of the camp that Washington set up near Philadelphia, where his men suffered freezing without clothing? Valley Forge. Why did the Continental Congress have difficulty providing supplies? Well, they lacked the power to tax. What was the name of the young Frenchman who became one of Washington's most trusted officers? Lafayette. How did Prussian officer Baron von Steuben help the Patriot cause? He trained the troops at Valley Forge. Which side did the Native Americans mostly help? The British. The powerful British Navy did this to American ports. They blockaded them. This American naval hero brought the fight to England. John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones said these famous words when asked to surrender. "I have not yet begun to fight." The British captured these two southern cities, Savanah and Charlestown, now known as Charleston. The British placed this general in charge of all British forces in the South, General Cornwallis. And that's it for now. I want to thank you guys for watching. Up next, we're going to the road to victory. We're almost at the end. Subscribe to catch our next video. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with worksheets, lesson plans, smartboard activities, guided notes, quizzes, and additional activities are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just click the link in the notes below or search for Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, guys, thanks for watching. Keep up that good work.